The most decisive form of warfare is not conducted with explosives and steel, but with spreadsheets and algorithms. It is a silent, protracted conflict where the objective is not the occupation of territory, but the systemic disintegration of a target nation's social and political fabric from within. The ultimate victory is achieved when a country collapses under the weight of its own internal contradictions, with its populace convinced that the catastrophe was a result of their own leadership's incompetence, never fully recognizing the invisible hand that guided them toward the precipice. This is the doctrine of modern economic warfare, a clinical, surgical process of national collapse engineered to be both devastatingly effective and entirely deniable. Every such operation begins not with an act of aggression, but with an exhaustive intelligence gathering phase, a deep economic and social reconnaissance of the target state. The objective is to create a comprehensive map of the nation's vulnerabilities. This involves identifying all critical dependencies, its reliance on specific imports for industry and food, its dependence on a single commodity for export revenue, the stability of its currency, and its exposure to foreign debt. Beyond macroeconomics, the analysis extends to the human element, profiling the key figures in finance, industry, and government to identify their personal financial exposures, their loyalties, and their potential breaking points. A nation cannot be dismantled until its every structural weakness and psychological fault line is intimately understood. From this map of vulnerabilities, a series of leverage points is identified. These are the economic choke points where maximum pressure can be applied with minimum overt force. For a nation dependent on oil exports, the leverage point is the global price of crude. For a state reliant on foreign loans, it is the international credit market and the institutions that govern it. For a country with a fragile industrial base, it is the supply chain for critical components and technologies. The ideal target possesses multiple interconnected vulnerabilities, allowing for a multi-pronged assault where pressure applied in one area creates cascading failures in others, amplifying the overall effect exponentially. Parallel to this economic mapping, a comprehensive information warfare campaign is designed. Economic collapse is as much a psychological phenomenon as it is a material one. Confidence is the bedrock of any economy, and the primary objective is to systematically erode it, both domestically and internationally. This involves the subtle seeding and amplification of narratives that highlight the target government's corruption, its economic mismanagement, and its political instability. The goal is to create a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom, where foreign investors pull out and the domestic population begins to hoard resources and lose faith in their own currency, thereby accelerating the very collapse the campaign predicts. The first active measure is often a direct assault on the nation's currency. In a globalized financial system, a national currency is a highly vulnerable target. By coordinating with allied financial institutions and hedge funds, a massive speculative attack can be launched. The target's currency is shorted on international markets, while the information campaign simultaneously broadcasts predictions of its imminent devaluation. This triggers a panic. The country's central bank is forced to burn through its foreign reserves in a futile attempt to defend the currency's value, but the coordinated selling pressure is overwhelming. As the currency plummets, the life savings of the middle class are wiped out, and the cost of all imported goods skyrockets, delivering the first shock of real economic pain directly to the population. Simultaneously, the nation's access to credit is severed, transforming its debt into a strategic weapon against it. International credit rating agencies, influenced by the narrative of instability, downgrade the nation's sovereign debt to junk status. This makes it impossible for the government to borrow money on the open market or roll over existing loans. Foreign creditors, both private and institutional, are pressured to recall their loans or refuse to extend further credit. The target is now financially isolated, facing a liquidity crisis that paralyzes the government's ability to function, forcing it to choose between defaulting on its international obligations or imposing crippling austerity measures on its own citizens. Sanctions are then introduced as the primary tool of long-term strangulation. This is a phased process. It begins with smart sanctions, targeting the foreign assets and travel rights of key political and business leaders. This serves to isolate the ruling elite and signal that cooperation may offer a personal way out. This is followed by sectoral sanctions, which block the target's key industries, oil, gas, mining, technology from accessing international markets, technology, and financing. The final stage is a full economic embargo, backed by secondary sanctions that punish any third-party nation or company that dares to do business with the target. This effectively disconnects the nation from the global economy, starving it of the resources it needs to survive. For nations whose economies are built on a single natural resource, the manipulation of global commodity prices is a devastatingly effective tool. A coordinated effort with strategic allies can flood the global market with an increased supply of that commodity, be it oil, gas, or minerals. This drives the price down to a level below the target nation's cost of production, or, at the very least, below the level required to balance its national budget. The government's primary source of revenue is decimated. Suddenly, it lacks the funds to pay for social programs, subsidize food and fuel, or even pay the salaries of its own soldiers and security forces, creating the preconditions for mass unrest. While the financial and commodity markets are under assault, a campaign of covert supply chain disruption begins. The goal is to create shortages of essential goods, fostering an atmosphere of desperation and chaos. This is not a formal blockade, but a campaign of friction. Shipments of food, medicine, and industrial spare parts are mysteriously delayed in third-party ports due to bureaucratic issues. International shipping insurers suddenly become unwilling to underwrite vessels heading to the target's ports. Key multinational corporations, under quiet pressure, decide to halt their operations within the country, citing the unstable environment. The result is empty shelves, shuttered factories, and a growing sense of societal breakdown. These engineered economic hardships are the fuel, not the fire. The ultimate objective is to channel the resulting popular anger against the ruling regime. The information campaign shifts into high gear, blaming every shortage and price hike squarely on the government's corruption and incompetence. Covert support in the form of funding, communications equipment, and strategic guidance is provided to opposition groups, labor unions, and civil society organizations. Labor strikes are encouraged, paralyzing what remains of the country's industry. Street protests are amplified through social media and international news coverage, creating the image of a massive, popular uprising against a failing government. While the population is squeezed from below, the ruling elite is fractured from above. The same officials and oligarchs who were targeted by initial sanctions are approached through discreet back channels. They are presented with a choice: go down with the sinking ship, or abandon the current leadership in exchange for the preservation of their personal wealth and a potential role in the future government. The promise of lifting sanctions on their foreign assets and ensuring their physical safety is a powerful motivator. This strategy of elite co-option aims to peel away the pillars of support around the head of state, leaving them isolated and powerless. The engineered panic and elite maneuvering trigger a massive wave of capital flight. Anyone with liquid assets attempts to move them out of the country before the currency becomes completely worthless and capital controls are imposed. The information campaign facilitates this by highlighting safe havens for wealth and exaggerating the risks of keeping assets within the country. This hemorrhaging of capital is the final nail in the coffin of the formal economy. The nation is left with no investment, no foreign reserves, and no financial means to stabilize itself. The economic death spiral becomes irreversible. The breakdown of the formal economy inevitably gives rise to a sprawling black market. This development is not hindered but actively encouraged. A thriving black market for currency, fuel, and essential goods serves multiple strategic purposes. It further delegitimizes the state by demonstrating its inability to provide for its citizens. It creates a new class of informal economic actors who have no loyalty to the existing regime. And it provides a covert mechanism for injecting funds to favored opposition groups, allowing them to provide services and build patronage networks that the government no longer can. At this stage, the target state reaches a tipping point. The government is effectively bankrupt. The currency is hyperinflated and worthless. The military and police forces are demoralized, their salaries unpaid or rendered meaningless by inflation, making them less willing to violently suppress popular protests. The capital city is gridlocked by strikes and demonstrations. The formal economy has ceased to function. The regime has lost both its legitimacy in the eyes of the people and its coercive ability to maintain order. It is a hollowed-out shell, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Throughout this process, controlling the international narrative is paramount. Every stage of the collapse must be framed for the global audience as a tragic but organic result of the target regime's own failures. The currency crisis is attributed to poor fiscal policy. The shortages are blamed on socialist mismanagement. The protests are portrayed as a noble, homegrown struggle for democracy. The operational fingerprints must remain invisible, allowing allied governments and international institutions to publicly call for a peaceful transition of power while disavowing any role in creating the crisis. With the old regime teetering on the brink of collapse, the focus shifts to managing the succession. A pre-vetted and cultivated opposition leadership must be ready to step into the power vacuum. This transition is carefully staged, managed to appear as a spontaneous victory for the will of the people. The chosen successors are presented as moderate, pro-business reformers who will restore order and build a new, positive relationship with the international community. Their first act in power is often to request emergency financial assistance from the very institutions that helped engineer the crisis. The post-collapse environment provides a golden opportunity for economic restructuring. The new, friendly government, desperate for international aid and legitimacy, is in no position to refuse the terms attached to it. This typically involves a program of rapid privatization of state-owned assets, often sold at bargain prices to allied foreign corporations. Markets are liberalized, trade barriers are removed, and the country's resources and labor are integrated into the global economic system on terms highly favorable to the operation sponsors. The economic sovereignty of the nation is effectively transferred to external actors. The doctrine's brilliance lies in its plausible deniability. Each component of the assault, viewed in isolation, is not an act of war. A speculative currency trade is just business. A credit downgrade is a standard financial assessment. A news story about corruption is just journalism. A labor strike is a domestic political issue. The warfare lies not in the individual actions, but in their synchronization and strategic intent. It is a symphony of economic destruction where each instrument plays its part, but the conductor remains hidden behind the curtain, allowing the entire operation to be dismissed by observers as a series of unfortunate, unconnected events. The psychological impact on the target nation's populace is profound and lasting. A generation is conditioned to associate its own national economic models with chaos, corruption, and failure. They are taught, through the harsh experience of engineered collapse, that stability, prosperity, and modernity can only be achieved by adopting foreign economic systems and entrusting their future to external institutions. This creates a deep-seated cultural aversion to economic nationalism or any policy that deviates from the approved globalist consensus, ensuring the nation remains a compliant and dependent client state for decades to come. In the final analysis, the most advanced form of warfare is the art of making your enemy dismantle himself. It is about achieving the geopolitical objectives of a full-scale military invasion, regime change, economic submission, and strategic alignment without firing a single shot, without deploying a single soldier, and without suffering a single casualty. The battlefield is the global financial system. The weapons are currency, debt, and information. And the victory is absolute when the vanquished nation not only accepts its new reality, but comes to believe that it chose its own subjugation.